Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, fellow journalists, my name is Bongiwe Tutu from the Africa-China Reporting Project in Johannesburg, South Africa. I greet you all and thank you for joining us for this training webinar on how to prepare a good reporting proposal. We have learned from our registration portal that we are joined by colleagues from all over the world, from here in South Africa, in Lesotho, Eswatini, Mozambique, Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Cameroon, Malawi, Liberia, Zambia, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Benin, South Sudan, Somalia, the Republic of Congo, and of course, outside of the African continent, we have participants from Hong Kong, China, Australia, and France. It's a great honor to have you all joining us today. The Africa-China Reporting Project at the WITS Journalism Department is truly proud to have this reach, and we trust that this webinar will be highly beneficial to improving your reporting, proposal writing, framing, and fieldwork skills here onwards. The project has, since its commencement, been supporting journalists through reporting grants and other capacity building and skills development opportunities. And in receiving and awarding grants, we have long noted that we should also support proposals which fall short in some elements. And so that is the purpose of this webinar. It is to continue to upskill and provide support to journalists in order to produce nuanced and representative reportage. Earlier this year, we put a call out for public health reporting grants in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing impact in Africa. We received over 300 applications and saw it crucial to create this opportunity for all panelists, for all applicants and interested journalists to learn how to improve their skills in writing reporting proposals. And so we appreciate the great response that we received from putting this webinar together, as it highlights the importance of this training to you. We thank all those who've already sent in questions and comments while registering, and we hope to be able to respond to all of them. And if you have any questions or comments during this webinar, you can share them under the Q&A section on this Zoom call. We are also live on Facebook, where you can engage with us at WITS China Africa Reporting Project. You can also tweet us your questions and comments at WITS China Africa. We will also be holding 8 more webinars scheduled for the rest of the year, so please see our website to participate. So we hope that you'll make full use of this opportunity and engage with us, and Paula specifically, on the mechanics to writing a good proposal. We have also prepared a document which can be used as a guiding reference to writing a proposal for the project. So this will be shared to all participants after the webinar, and it will also be available on our website. I will now hand over to our facilitator and trainer, Paula Frey, the CEO of Frey Intermedia, Africa's flagship media organization. Paula and her team have been very instrumental in their mandate to empower stories and storytellers across the global south. The organization has been a long-standing asset, and if you would like to learn more about their work, please visit Frey Intermedia's website. So I leave you in very capable hands. Paula, welcome to you and thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Bongiwe. It's really, really good to be here. Greetings from a very cold Johannesburg, even though it's sunny. And it's really good to be here with journalists from all over the continent and beyond. Today's session is going to take place in English, and I'm going to be taking you through the process of how to write a good proposal with specific reference to the Africa-China Reporting Project requirement, but also with tips for just proposals in general. I've gone through all the questions. I'm going to try and answer as many questions as possible during the session. And I'll also have some time at the end of the session for you to be able to ask any additional questions if I haven't answered them. So thank you very much. We have a chat room and we have a Q&A room. I would ask that you post your questions in the Q&A session, and you post your and that you introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are, where you're from. It'd be really good to know who's on the chat and build a bit of a community here. So welcome everyone again. It's good to be here. At any time, if you have a particular question, remember to put it in the Q&A chat, and I'll be checking that intermittently. So I just want to share my screen. Then we will in fact be sharing some templates and after the specific workshop, so you'll be able to see an actual template and also sharing some outlines. So I'm going to be looking at today the art of a good proposal, getting the basics right. So what are the basics for a good proposal? How to find the standout elements. And here a number of you actually asked, how do I hook, how do I have a good hook for my proposal? How do I stand out from everyone else? I'm going to identify some of the common mistakes, including when we were reviewing the last group of submissions for proposals, and then I will leave at least 30 minutes for some questions and answers. So let's get started then. So I actually tweeted this morning, a big spoiler alert. I was saying that really a good proposal is like writing a good story, right? Good proposals really are, they use all of the skills that you have as a journalist, starting with understanding who your audience is. And when you're writing a proposal, your audience is always the donor who's made the call for proposals. It's always the person who you are submitting the proposal to. And so when we talk about a proposal being targeted to the audience, I'm not asking you to flatter the donor or to suggest stories that you think might make the donor look good or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that at all. In fact, it's probably one way to get your proposal put on the side if you did something that you thought that the donor might be flattered by, etc. So when I say that you need to be targeted at the audience, what I really am asking you to do is to make sure that you understand the requirements of your funder. You need to understand what they're looking for, what kind of submissions that they are actually asking for, and not simply do a cut and paste of something that you've done previously. So the first thing about a good story is that we're always writing for our audience. The next thing about a good proposal, it is that it's well researched. You can't really argue very strongly that your story is worth funding if you actually haven't done your basic research. It's true when you're writing a story, it's true when you're writing a proposal. And you cannot write a proposal to say, give me money so that I can do the research, because the person who's going to fund you really wants to have an idea that the story that is being suggested actually is doable. That you're not simply sucking something out of your thumb, but that you've given real thought and consideration for the story. The next thing is that your story is written logically, and having subheads, having headlines and subheadings within your proposal is always very useful, so that the person who's reviewing the submission can very, very quickly see where the information is that they're looking for. It's written logically, it has a logical flow, it sets out a problem statement, it sets out what we're going to do, and it kind of works its way down until the budget. And of course, everything links, right? When I say that something needs to be written logically, you really have a conclusion that is backed up by the rest of the story. In the same way as you would have the conclusion that is backed up by the rest of the information in your story, in your proposal, you have a budget that is backed up by the rest of the story. The budget doesn't start to introduce things that you haven't mentioned before. It must be clearly presented, you know. don't give the reader a really long set of a long set of words, but rather present it in a way that makes it easier for the reader to be able to understand. And finally, a good story makes deadline. You've got to make sure that your proposal actually meets the deadline and is presented in the format that the person is actually asking for. So then I'm going to break down this process, and I'm really going to be looking at various elements of the proposal and etc. So as Bongiwe was saying earlier on, there were over 300 submissions. I want to tell you that sometimes I've been part of submission reviews where we've had thousands, right? Some of the global ones that aren't very, very niche get lots and lots of proposals. In the NGO world, the proposals just are so numerous that very often it starts off with a concept note before you actually do the proposal, because so many people actually submit something. And it's quite possible that when you submitted your last proposal, that in fact you met all the criteria, your proposal was well written, but that there are only a limited number of proposals that can actually make the final list, and that you might have for some reason not made the final list, but still had a really good proposal. I want to kind of make it clear that it's not one person who's sitting there reading through all the proposals, but in fact, it's checked by a panel. It's checked against the submission requirements, and it's checked by a panel. So there's a panel reviewing it. And while there might be some differences within the panel group in terms of what they like and they don't like, they're all being asked to check your submission against very, very clear criteria. And so there's very often not huge differences between what people think are good submissions or not good submissions. The reason why I'm emphasizing that it's being reviewed by a panel is because you really have to think of yourself writing for a group of people that, and therefore you need to be as clear as possible about what you're trying to achieve and try and answer all the questions. Nobody's going to come back and necessarily ask you to clarify something. There's just no time in the submission process. So that's really, really important to understand, that this proposal is going from person to person to person, and so clarity is absolutely important. I want to say that most people, most organizations who do a call for proposal start out by weeding out the people who don't meet the basic requirements of producing all the documents, etc. So very often you might have hundreds of people, but in those hundreds of people, only about half of them might actually make deadline, produce all the documents required, etc. And so don't think that you're going to be forgiven because you didn't submit one document or etc. Because you have an amazing proposal. Very often the proposals that don't have all the documentation, the proposals that don't make deadline, don't even get sent to the panel to be reviewed. They get sorted out before they're actually submitted for review. So the very, very first thing of writing a good proposal is to make sure that you submit it in the format that people require, that you submit it by deadline, and that you actually submit all the required document. So I want to, before we speak broadly about proposals, because there are in fact a number of organizations supporting journalists at the moment who are making calls for proposals, I want to look very specifically at the Africa-China reporting project. So the Africa-China reporting project actually requires that the proposals that are submitted from journalists need to be relevant and focused and detailed and thorough. Now, when we talk about relevant and focused, actually, you know, the starting point is, I know that times are hard, and I know that very, very often journalists are spending a lot of time writing proposals. When I headed up the Interpress Service news agency, we were writing proposals weekly, and we very often thought of ourselves as being, as having done really well if we had up to 25% of our proposals accepted. Of course, those proposals are much bigger in scale and scope and even funding requirements than these. But one of the starting points really is that if you're writing proposals, particularly at a time like such as now when we're all in the midst of a pandemic, and really many people have been retrenched, or their time has been cut, or their work has been cut. If you're writing proposals, be very careful of having a template that you simply rework slightly for the funder. When Africa China Reporting Project says that it wants proposals that are relevant and focused, it really means that it wants proposals that are broadly aligned with the Africa China Reporting Project's requirements. And when it makes a specific call around a specific theme, then that's the theme, that's the focus that they really want. Africa China Reporting Project very often makes calls around specific themes. So the last call, for example, was around health for COVID-19. And so it needs to be very, very focused in terms of what they're asking for. It also, in terms of Africa China's reporting project, really wants to see proposals that make use of individuals or communities to tell the story of on-the-ground impact and perspective. A lot of donors, and Africa China Reporting Project certainly does this, will have a call that is fairly detailed and tells you quite clearly what they're looking for in proposals. But it won't hurt you to actually go onto the website and have a look at the organization, what drives the organization, what kind of things they value, but also if there are examples of previous stories that they funded, to also look at those stories and see what makes those stories unique and what makes them, what might have made them a winning proposal. So relevant and focused, broadly aligned with Africa China reporting requirements, focused in the specific projects or issues, for example, health or media, or through the prism of Africa China relations, and making use of individuals or communities to tell the story of on the ground impact and perspective. And just generally, right, being able to link your the theory of what you're trying to write about with its impact on people is always a good way to write impactful stories. So rather than simply write about finance or politics or etc., you know, find the people that are really going to be impacted by the issue that you're writing about. It's not unusual for people to try and impress with a vast amount of knowledge. So we'll get proposals that will have lots of jargon in it. We'll get proposals that will have lots of, big thinkers or politicians or etc., but won't be able to explain what impact the story will have on people on the ground. And really, you want to be able to show how all of this information really is going to be used in order to impact the people that you're writing about. So relevant and focused, that's a starting point. The next thing, and this is really difficult, right? Because it feels like you're asking for money to do the story. Why are you doing so much research for the proposal? You might as well just do the story. But in fact, when people are reviewing proposals, they want to get a sense that the writer has done sufficient research so that the story actually is doable. That the story is something that they can actually produce, that it's not something that they've thought about and it's a good idea, but once they have the money, they're going to have to adapt the story because the information they think they're going to get isn't out there, or the people that they think they're going to interview are not there. And so a really good proposal, particularly for Africa China Reporting Project, is one that is very detailed and very thorough. And so, I mean, there are a number of proposals that we saw that didn't make the initial shortlist, that was simply kind of very vague, right? Vague story ideas of I want, and not even story ideas, but rather issues. You know, just to clarify, so a story idea has a very clear angle, has a very clear idea of what sources we're going to be able to use, who we're going to be able to interview, what kind of documentation is available, where I can get this information, etc. That's a story idea. An issue is I want to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. Right? That's just too vague, too broad to to be able to see exactly what kind of story you're going to produce. So what you need to do is a detailed and thorough proposal that outlines very, very clearly your story idea. The proposal is therefore well organized because you've got more detail. You need to be able to structure your proposal in a very, very clear, logical way, so that the person who's reading it and basically has all their questions answered, the more and more they read the proposal. So it's very well organized. The Africa-China Reporting Project really kind of encourages, and it tells you that they encourage you to have a headline at the outset, right? And so let's just pause for a minute and think about, so what is a good headline, right? A good headline attracts attention. It tells us more or less what's in the story, but not everything that's in the story. It gives a very clear idea of what the main story outcome is, what the theme is. And so when you have a good headline and you follow up the good headline with a very nice, strong introductory paragraph that effectively sells your story, right? And why your story is important at the time of submission. Why your story is unique, you know, why your story needs to be funded because it absolutely needs to be out there. I think it's really, really important that you recognize that when you are one amongst hundreds of submissions, you need to stand out. And one way to stand out is to have a headline that captures attention, and right at the beginning, have something that says, read this proposal thoroughly because it has a really good theme. It has a really good hypothesis for its investigation. And then the third thing is, and I'm going to speak about this some more, is that it has a very clear methodology. In other words, you're going to talk about how you're going to do this investigation. And in the methodology is very often the elements of your budget, right? So the methodology talks about what is the plan for this investigation? How am I going to do it? The methodology can't be, I'm going to interview people. If you're interviewing people, there is often a structure to your interviews. Who are you going to interview first? How are you going to find the human interest angle? Who's going to help you with your fact checking? Who's going to ensure that the story is understandable for the audience? So a clear methodology includes a plan for how the investigation will be undertaken. Let me be clear. If your methodology is too vague, it weakens your proposal. If your methodology really outlines a plan that you know is unrealistic, right? If your country is in lockdown, then you need to be taking into consideration whether or not you can in fact travel, whether you can do face-to-face interviews, etc., etc. If you, if the global landscape is that no, planes aren't flying, etc., then you can't fly from country to country to do a story, and so it needs to be feasible. It also needs to be coherent so that the person who's reviewing it can see quite clearly, right, how the story is unfold. Think of at this stage, when you're talking about methodology, think of the person who's reviewing your proposal as a really difficult editor that you work with, right? The kind of editor that's making you justify the story all the time. The kind of editor who's looking for holes in your argument, in your brief, so that you're constantly making sure that in fact you know that you know what the shortcomings might be in your argument for the story to be funded. Africa-China Reporting Project also likes to have a clear idea of who you're going to be interviewing. If you have specific people or names, that really adds value. But it also is possible to say, these people are my starting point, but once I've interviewed them, I will be able to identify more sources, more people to be able to interview, etc. It helps to be able to say what kind of interviews you're going to be doing, whether what kind of issues you're going to be looking at the interviews, and then also how the interviews actually form part of the investigation in terms of methodology. And then you can also say in terms of what the documentation is that you're going to be needing. For example, and this is why methodology, a really well thought out methodology helps. If you're doing a financial investigation and you actually need to access documentation from government agencies, then you can ask funding to apply for access to information requests, or you can apply for documentation to pay for fees at courts, or pay for fees at things like CIPRO, where companies or directors are registered, for example. So it might feel like all of this is unnecessary when in fact you're going to be doing a lot of the research when you're doing the story. Doing that initial research and having a very clear methodology also helps you to be able to detail your budget. Increasingly, donors are asking people to be very specific about their budget. You know, how much are you going to spend on transport? How much are you spending on fees? How much are you spending on data? How much are you spending on a fixer? How much are you spending on a camera person? And so you need to be thinking through all of these things in a very logical way and making notes of them so you can break your budget down, rather than say, I'm going to need $1,500 in order to do the story. The donor is going to want to know, what are you going to use that money for? And then so now this is the criteria, right? Really let's just go back: relevant and focused, detailed and thorough, clear methodology. And now I want to talk about the documentation, and I want to talk about the documentation particularly around Africa China. I want you to know that you might think that these documents are simply paperwork. But when the panelists are reviewing your submission, they read your submission, they read the budget, they also read your CV, right? It doesn't mean that if you're a young reporter and your CV shows that you have a little experience, that you won't be considered for it. But they certainly when the panelists are looking at your updated curriculum vitae, what they're looking for is to see whether there's something in your CV that backs up your ability to be able to do this, right? And so what the Africa-China Reporting Project is looking for is really an updated CV. So don't just grab any CV because deadline is coming. Update your CV. If you can, right, in your CV, every time you show a new place that you've worked, do a little outline of what are the skills or what are the key things you actually did at that organization. Make sure that your CV includes where you are, right? So for example, if you are Zimbabwean, but you're actually based in South Africa, let your CV show that. Your full name, your surname, your contact details, how we can get hold of you, and active contact details, right? Your email, your mobile, your WhatsApp number, your mobile number, etc. Your gender and your nationality, your current occupation, and then also your previous occupations. Again, when we're talking about previous occupations, we really do want to be looking at things like, I want to be able to see how your previous occupations might even support the investigation that you're currently doing. So supporting documents for the Africa-China project include your updated CV, your budget, and a list of your recently published work. Again, the recently published work, don't just take anything. Take something that shows that you have the ability to do in-depth investigations, that you have the ability to really do the story that you are proposing. If you are stretching your abilities, for example, if you if this is your first investigation, then in your proposal say, this is my first big investigation, but previous stories that I've done have really prepared me in terms of doing it really prepared me in terms of getting ready for this investigation. And then give examples of the previous stories that show elements of the investigation that you're about to do. So really, the previously published works, the panel does in fact go back and have a look at what kind of stories you've done before, and essentially all of that is evidence that you are able to deliver on your promise. You can do a cover letter of motivation or a letter of recommendation, but these are optional for Africa and China project. Although some donors globally like to see those. So you may as well ask people to give you letters of recommendation if necessary. When it comes to the budget, I was saying earlier on, right? If the donor says that the budget is 1,500, if Africa China reporting project says that your reporting grant is 1,500 or that it is 3,000, obviously, if you fall below that, they will still fund it. But if it's over, right, I mean, you have to have, it's unlikely to be considered. And if it is considered, it might, you'd have to really show a lot of evidence as to why you're asking for more than the budgeted amount. My suggestion is stay within the budget as much as possible, unless some donors do want to see that that other donors or even you are actually funding part of the storytelling yourself. But if the donor is not asking for that specifically, if the donor is not asking for how you are in fact contributing to your own investigation, then stay within the budget. Stay within the budget. You don't want to be an outlier and therefore easy to kind of put aside. Really, if my suggestion also is that as much as possible, you don't come in too under the budget, right? Because it would suggest that your story is not on the scale of the kind of storytelling that the donor is looking for. So look at the budget, and then if you're coming in well under the budget, then really ask yourself, am I thinking too small for the story? Can I do a bigger story? Can I make, can I do more investigation, more detail, and make the story better than what I'm initially thinking? I really, we'll talk about this some more, but I want to talk about, I'll talk about it when we're writing about standout proposals. I want to talk about the process of actually thinking about the story that you want to propose. I want to conclude this session, this section of the presentation that looks specifically at the Africa-China reporting project, to just reiterate that the Africa-China reporting project really seeks to facilitate journalists to investigate complex dynamics and uncover untold stories. Too many submissions were same old, same old. We've heard the story before. This is not an investigation. This is a feature. This is everyone's doing the story. Why should we fund you if everyone else is doing the story? You're proposing a story that has, quite frankly, already been written. So be aware of that the Africa-China reporting project is not looking for same old, same old. In fact, no donor who's going to spend money on your storytelling wants to fund a story that somebody could have done in an office by picking up a phone. They really want to fund stories that show a depth of investigation, that unpack complexities of our societies, that tell untold stories, stories that would not have been told if a donor didn't help someone actually tell them. And in the case of Africa-China reporting project, they really are looking for an emphasis of on the ground impact and perspectives. Don't sit in your office and write a story. Don't phone people. Africa-China Reporting Project wants you to be able to go to the ground and actually tell the stories of people on the ground and really illustrate how the lives of people of Africa are changing amid a comprehension or an understanding of Africa-China relations. Some of the stories are through the prisms of Africa-China relations and some don't. So ask yourself when you're writing a proposal, whether your story illustrates the lives of people of Africa and how they are being impacted by the issue in the call, or how people in Africa themselves are shaping their own lives and futures. By its very, very nature, what they're looking for are the voices of ordinary people as well as the experts, right? If you want to go down on the ground and you actually want to tell the story of ordinary people. Usually, but not always, proposals supported by the Africa-China project will employ the prism of Africa-China relations. In the last call, for example, some of the submissions, some of the calls or some of the themes didn't necessarily have to have that prism, but some did. It is very, very important that you read the guidelines for each proposal, that you read the guidelines very, very carefully and just make sure that, that you understand very clearly what Africa-China Reporting Project is asking for, or if it's another donor, what they're actually asking for. I'm going to just pause there just for a second to check if we have any questions. I'm going to just have a look at the chat and check if there's nothing that I need to respond to. Okay, it's really good to see everyone. Thank you also for introducing yourselves. And as a reminder, we will in fact share both this proposal, but also an outline for the Africa-China Reporting Project guides to writing proposal, as well as some templates that we will be able to give to you that you can have a look at. So those are the very specific ones for Africa-China Reporting Project. So Bongiwe then also asked me to please have a look and just give some feedback of reviewing, right, the proposals that we went through, what were some of the common issues, etc. So I do want to say that, I mean, it breaks my heart as someone who loves good storytelling. It really breaks my heart because we always get too many really, really good submissions that don't make the cutoff point. And then we also get really good submissions that just fail to do one small thing or really just kind of do a little bit of extra detail. And so I'm hoping, A, to do two things: to encourage you to keep on applying, and B, to encourage you to make sure that your submissions are really kind of fit the criteria of what the Africa-China Reporting Project is, and to be a lot harder on yourself in making those submissions, right? So let's step back and kind of look at big picture. For me, the art of writing good proposals really is like writing a good story. And the story process is interwoven with the proposal preparation process. And I speak as someone, in the last few months, I've done reviews of proposals for about three or four different organizations. And while the specifics might differ, the specifics in terms of theme or the framework of what is required or the guidelines of what is required might differ, the overarching approach to writing a good proposal is really the art of good storytelling. And it starts with ideas generation. So when a proposal call goes out, it's a really good starting point is to have your own brainstorm for a story, right? I mean, if you're going to write a story about, if you're going to write a story that really looks at the economic impact of COVID, you almost have to be thinking about how you're going to convince your editor, right? How are you going to convince your editor to do the economic impact of COVID-19. First of all, you need to consider all kinds of things. You can't give a daily story idea to a donor who has a longer time frame. And what do I mean by that? A hard news story idea is what is the change in, what is the economic impact of COVID-19? I'd be talking to the minister, I'd be doing this, I'd be doing that, I'd be doing this. I can speak to those people and I can write a story. When you're talking about an investigation into the economic impact of COVID, it means going onto the ground and talking to various people. It means, getting more depth, finding documentation, having a story idea that survives the 2, 3, maybe even a 4-week period of the funding review of all of the proposals. It can't be a matter of that when the donor finally looks at your proposal, your story's already been written by someone else who wasn't looking for funding. So when it comes to ideas generation, it can't be a hard news idea, but it also can't be a feature, right? It can't be a feature in the sense that it's just a collection of he said, she said, he said, she said. You really want to have an idea that has longevity, that really kind of lives for a week or so, that allows you to really get your teeth into the story, that requires a lot of investigation and reporting and research, etc. But that is also unique, right? And so sometimes you need to ask yourself, what's unique about my ideas? Right? If I'm opening the paper or if I'm listening to the radio or watching TV, is someone else doing the same story? Or am I going to say, I'm going to do a story that's going to survive because I'm the only person that's looking at this community or that's looking at women in this particular way, etc. So ideas generation is really important, and you need to spend a lot of time to make sure that you've really thought through your ideas. Part of the process of ideas generation really is the issue of who you're going to be speaking to, where you're going to get the information, etc. This is the point at which we're beginning to get a sense that your story is not only unique and therefore fundable, but that your story has also been thought through so that it is practical. And then you do a little bit of research, right? Because what you're trying to do is to make sure that you can tell the donor, I've done a bit of research and this is doable. I've spoken to these people and these are the other people that I still need to speak to. Not just for Africa China reporting project, but also for other media funding entities that I've worked with. When we see that someone has done some research, you kind of say, well, this story is already started, let's help finish it. And very often you can say, this is the story I want to do. I've already started speaking to people, but your funding will help me to be able to do this, right? So this is how your funding is going to help make the story better and get the story finalized. Good stories start off with a good story plan, right? What's the narrative going to be? How I'm going to outline it. And that's also your methodology, right? What is the methodology of writing the story? And then when you're going in and you're doing your proposal, the story focus, you show that your story focus is clear and that this is the direction. Funders know that stories change on the ground, that you might have this direction that you're going to, but when you get on the ground, things might change a little bit. But we don't want someone who's basically kind of blindly going and looking for a story. We want someone that's kind of going with a plan as much as possible. And so Taiwo Alimi asked, what part of the proposal is the most important? Just like your story, right? Beginning and endings are important. You want the beginning of your of your proposal to really shout at the person who's reading it to say, read me, pay close attention, because this is a proposal that's got a cracker of a story with it. And the ending of the proposal is also important because you bring everything together at the end and you kind of outline, you reinforce the strength of your proposal and you link it to your budget. Your budget must be aligned to the narrative. Sometimes you read proposals and the narrative is very clear, and then you read the budget and you go, the budget, you know, is understated, overstated. The budget isn't detailed enough. This person doesn't appear to have actually understood their own costs. So really for me, writing a proposal, writing a story, you want to hook the reader right at the beginning and give them a very clear idea that this proposal is worth reading and worth investing your time in. And so really, I was saying earlier on, right, that one of the ways to cut it down from thousands of proposals to hundreds of proposals, or from hundreds of proposals to about 200, 300 proposals, is really to kind of say, if the person can't get the deadline right, if the person can't fill out the format, if the person can't do boom, 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 that we ask them to do, if the person can't submit the right documentation, can we trust them with our money? No. So the very first thing about getting the basic right is to follow the guidelines. Give all the documents they want. Just create a checklist for yourself that says a CV updated, yes, check. A budget separate, yes, check. Methodology, yes, check. So that you're actually giving them everything they want. Also check whether they want things individually or whether they want it as one document. Some donors make that requirement, and you want to make sure that you're not putting everything into one document when in fact they are assessing them separately. Some of the donors that I work with want the budget separate because they want to look at the proposal first, and they don't want to be influenced by the budget. And so only once your proposal has kind of makes a short list do they actually look at that. Do they look at the budget and make sure that the budget works? Also make sure that the story idea is within the scope of the project. So there are a lot of things that journalists get wrong when they're writing their proposals. But one of the things we definitely get wrong is to think that our story idea is so amazing that we don't need to follow the rules or the guidelines, or to think that because the person is asking for health, when they see our amazing story about the environment, they're going to move away from health and give us a funding for an environment story. Make sure that your story idea is within the scope of the project. If you are an environment reporter and the story idea is about health, you need to recognize the intersectionality of our lives, right? It's almost impossible to think of health in the absence of the environment. It's almost impossible to think of health in the absence of the economy. It's almost impossible to think of health without access to government services, etc. And so think about how your story idea aligns to the donor's priorities, and make sure that you're actually doing that. The other thing is to assume too much knowledge on the person who's reading your proposal. It's really a good idea to think like a foreign correspondent in some ways, right? And the way you do that is you really are kind of saying, what does this person need to know in order to see the impact of my story? So, you know, when you're reviewing stories from across the continent, not all panel members will have a full understanding or an intimacy with the issues in your country. When I say that you need to paint a clear picture of the problem you are addressing, it always helps, particularly for continent-wide calls, right? If the call is just for your country, that's a different matter. But if you're submitting it to an organization overseas or something like Africa China Reporting Project, you want to have a context paragraph. You want to have a paragraph that really talks about what the problem is or what the issue is, and why your story is going to be looking at it, and why and what the resulting impact might be. So don't assume that the reader has an understanding of the issue, right, or of your context. Always put in little explanations, little explanatory paragraphs as much as possible. I've said this before because I really feel so strongly about it. I mean, sometimes when you're reading proposals, you kind of go, well, that story right, was 2 weeks ago. That story needed to be done 2 weeks ago. It's just a hard news story. It's an inverted pyramid story structure. It's not an investigation. It's a straightforward feature that you want to write. It's a he said, she said feature. An investigation really kind of needs a lot more grappling with the issue, a lot more unpacking of complex issues and more kind of looking at the impact on the ground. So don't submit a time-bound story for a long lead call for proposals. Even if your deadline is today, it takes time to sort through all of the applications. It takes time to shortlist them. It takes time to do, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're only going to be getting the funds in a few weeks, maybe even a month, or sometimes even 2 months. You need to really make sure that the story you're proposing is going to be alive by the time you still get the money. And I think that's some of the issues, right? Align your proposal idea to the donor budget. Don't make it too big. Don't make your budget too big. Don't make your budget too small. Make sure that if the proposal is giving us if the donor is giving a certain amount of money, that you really are kind of making sure that your idea is aligned to it. If you're falling well short of it, then can you do a series of stories? If you're convinced that the story focus that you've got, then can you turn it from one story into, various elements? Can you look at whether you can make it a multi-platform then? Can you bring in visual elements? Can you bring in audio elements? Make sure that a story is not too big, nor is it too small. I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Be aware of storytelling restrictions. Can you complete the story within the necessary time frame? Are you, biting off too much and the story needs a very, very long lead in order to do it? Are you aware of the restrictions in terms of can you get out and do the story during this pandemic, etc.? And then are there language requirements? If they say submitted in English, submit it in English. Have someone review your proposal, have someone check it, even if ultimately your story might be in another language. Make sure that every presenter actually, every person who's reviewing your story is able to understand it. I'm going to stop the share just for a minute because I want to go. So a lot of people often ask, what is the outline that you want? And Africa-China Reporting Project will send out a couple of templates and examples of things that they've had before. But for me, the outline of a story is quite similar to the outline of the proposal. It's a very logical process, right? You hook the audience, you follow it by outlining. So you hook the audience by letting them know what this is about. And then each of your little sections of your proposal are broken up into little blocks. So I'm going to just very, very quickly share a page sample. I want to share with you a sample of, right? Oh, for heaven's sake, it keeps on putting up the wrong thing. I want to show you a sample of what we really want to be looking at, and the reason for that is because I want you to see how the outline is very, very logical and in the way it flows. It was on my slide, but I just want to there we are. So this is a sample proposal, right? So what we're looking at is, what is your proposed topic? What does Chinese investment mean for this community transition to a climate resilient green economy? Can you see how the mini headline really kind of gets to the heart of what the story is about? And then it's followed by who the journalist is, what their position is, what the news outlet is, followed by the format of the story, the way the story would be told, etc. And so each of these are very, very logical blocks that the writer is actually following, right? Proposed topic, the format, and then a summary of the story. So and the summary of the story really is about getting by summarizing and reviewing the context. And what the summary basically is doing is it's telling the reviewer why the story is important, why you would want to be looking at the story. What the writer has also done is to say what the significance of the proposed story is. This is why the story really is important. This story is underreported by media. Then it looks at the key areas that the story is going to be looking at, right? It's going to be looking at climate adaptation. It looks at proposed interviews and sources. It looks at the proposed budget, and the budget is itemized. It's got local transportation. It's got a daily stipend. It's got accommodation. It's got research, assistant, fixer, etc., etc. It also has a delivery date, and it has a media house for publication. One of the things that has happened globally, is a lot of journalists are no longer full-time. There's been a huge rise in the number of freelance journalists. And so an increasing number of donors actually understand that. And they understand that, in fact, what we really want is that a number of journalists are unable, aren't working in a media house. And so very often donors will have to look to see whether you've got a publishing plan. For example, you're proposing funding for this particular story, but do you know where it will be published or who will publish it, etc. Sometimes it also helps if to support your story, if you can say, I am a freelancer, but I write for Al Jazeera or Reuters or for allafrica.com, etc., etc. And here's a letter from the allafrica.com editor to say that they would be interested in publishing if, in fact, the story is produced. Very often editors will give a letter that say, I will publish the story if it meets all the criteria of our stories, but we certainly are very, very interested in publishing the story. So I think that's really quite important, right? Is that you have a clear understanding of the kinds of things that you're going to be looking at, and then you break down the proposal. So just a reminder, proposed topic, the journalist's name, the format, the summary, what makes the story so important, the sources of interviews, the budget, the conclusion, etc. Sometimes it's also useful when you are writing a proposal, particularly for an investigation, to give the reader or the funder an idea that you understand that there are some risks in your investigation. And these risks could be actual safety risks. And then you need to say, how you're going to mitigate those risks, because no donor wants to put someone in a harm's way. And so they want to be able to see that the person who's making the proposal is aware of the risk and is actually making sure that, that they've mitigated the risks. The other issue is that that donors, when we're looking at risks, we're also looking at things like, it's a risk that somebody might not talk to me, right? And so you need to say, it's true, some of the risks is that the community might be unwilling to talk to me, but I have engaged an NGO and we will be working with them in order to get the community's voice. So you need to identify what the risks are in your investigation, but more importantly, you need to make it quite clear how you've mitigated those risks, how you've taken steps to make sure that you can overcome those risks, right? And so all of these things, all of this extra detail, all of this on the ground storytelling, reporting, etc., is what makes you stand out from everyone else. I mean, essentially what you have is you have a lot of people, and then what the panelists often start doing is to look at the shortcomings in something. And so it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you have a small pool of people who make all who meet all the criteria. And so now what you're looking for is which ones stand out. And so I really want to talk about how to make your proposal stand out from all of the proposals that are actually being written. And it's difficult, right? But it's not impossible. The people who end up getting the grant have standout elements. And so for me, really, the standout element, the number one thing that gets someone's proposal accepted is when I'm hooked. When I kind of say, this is the story I want to read, or I can see that given who this person's target audience is, even if it's not a story that I want to read, but given who the target audience is for the story, I'm hooked. And to hook an audience, you have to give them something new. You have to give them something fascinating, something really, really interesting. And that means that you really need to spend time on your story idea and think about what makes your story different. But in the actual proposal, sometimes you really have to dig through a proposal to see why the story is unique. Sometimes the unique selling point is right at the end. After you've plowed through everything else, you kind of get to the end and you think, that might actually make a nice story. Let me go back and reread this proposal. But you can't take that risk, right? You can't take the risk that they're going to plow through everything else and get to the end and kind of go, yes, that this is a great proposal. So you want to start with an attention-grabbing headline and an opening argument that kind of says, this is an incredible story because this is the story I want to do, and this story is important because it's going to have this impact. So really right at the outset, you're kind of saying to whoever's reading this proposal, this is a critical story. And then they're more likely to overlook small little flaws. As long as you meet all the criteria, as long as you've submitted all the information, right? They might overlook a spelling error or that you didn't name all your interviewees, etc. But the story idea is so compelling. The story idea itself is so compelling that we really have a sense that the story, we must find a way to get the story told. So start with the attention-grabbing headline, follow it up immediately with a succinct, short argument as to why your story is important, and then organize your argument so that it kind of flows in a very logical way. Start off with context. This is the context of my country. This is why this issue is so important. It's important to remember, right? So in a country like South Africa, for example, COVID-19 has had a huge impact. The number of our infections has really rocketed, and the number of deaths is increasing every day. And so at the face of it, if we're talking about a health story in South Africa, the story of COVID-19 alone might be important. But if you explain to the panel who's reviewing the story that in fact, in South Africa, you have a huge health issue. You have large numbers of people who are on antiretrovirals, and the fears that are related to COVID-19 might in fact discourage these people from going to clinics to go and get their antiretrovirals, to going for checkups, etc., because they are at risk. Even though the call might be for COVID-19 stories, you would then be able to argue, having given a really good context, why your story wants to focus specifically on HIV and AIDS. But you need to organize your story, your argument, and you need to make sure that you put the right context and background in. But you do not want to overload your proposal with too much information, right? It's just like a good story. You need to give the reader what they need to know, not everything that you know. You need to give the reader the critical information. So you want to avoid irrelevant information, and you don't want to be verbose. You just want to talk and talk and talk and talk. Think about the panel, right? They are reading endless proposals. If you're suddenly giving a 20-page proposal and other people are able to write succinct proposals of 3-4 pages, I mean, you know, it's just like too much information, nothing is going to stick. So avoid irrelevant information. But at the same time, do make sure that you've got sufficient information. A number of people, to be quite honest, a number of people in the last round just had so little information, it was almost impossible to see why the story was worth funding, to see what the challenges were, etc. Really, you're not such a brilliant journalist and you're not so well known that if you toss your hat into the ring with a one-pager that kind of says, I want to do the story, that the panel is going to go, oh, look, you know, here's a great story. You really do need to justify it. Too many journalists, Aurelia is asking, you know, where do most journalists go wrong with writing their proposals? Too much assumed knowledge, assuming that the panel knows who they are, knows their work, knows the context in their country, knows why the story is important, and thinks that because they've made a suggestion without any angle, interviewees, etc., that angle is going to work. Or journalists who actually have a template of stories that they're always writing, and every time someone makes a call, they're actually kind of every time someone makes a call, they're just going to change, do a cut and paste of the donor's name, you know, and then submit that as well. So Henry is asking, you know, why do some proposals rejected in Africa China reporting grants get accepted elsewhere? Is it the volumes of proposal you received or the criteria? And Henry, I can also speak from my experience of other grant making groups that I've been, panels that I've been on. You know, it's a combination of things. And that's why I was saying earlier on, we saw a lot of amazing proposals. It breaks my heart as a storyteller that we can't fund every single proposal that we see. And so very often, the final group, you know, you're literally kind of going, these three are all amazing. Which ones should we, you know, which one of the three should we be giving the funding to? And it's a combination of things, that that there's a large number of proposals being received, that the proposals, that we're looking for the proposals that are most relevant to the criteria or to the particular theme that has been looking at. We're looking at people who are showing innovation, showing things that are different. And I think ultimately you're also looking at impact. So sometimes your proposal is not accepted, not because it doesn't meet the criteria, it doesn't, it hasn't done everything that is expected of it, it isn't good, and it hasn't kind of engaged the panel that has actually reviewed it. It's just a combination of all of those things, right? It's a combination of the number of applications, the number of good applications, the criteria, and then just kind of looking out for the standout applications that show impact. So in the questions that people asked before today, the one thing that came out over and over was, what is a good hook? What is a good hook for a proposal? And I think in many ways, it's like the introductory paragraph, right? There are some variations of an introductory paragraph in a story. There are different ways of doing an introductory paragraph. But all of them link to the issue of then what makes the reader sit up and take notice. What is going to make your story, your proposal, stand out from the 300 others that have been submitted? And for me, it's a combination of things when it comes to the proposal, right? It's the unusual story. This is the story that no one else is doing, or the story that's been done before but been done badly, or it's been done very weakly. And what you want to do is to really get down to the nitty-gritty, and you want to be able to give people's voices. So that opening hook really is about having a very strong opening argument about what you are proposing, why what you are proposing is important, and why your proposal is worth supporting, right? Show me impact in that hook. Show me impact. Show me the impact that your story is going to have on the lives of the people you're writing about, whether it's about highlighting their issue for the first time, whether it's about telling a story that is often overlooked, whether it is about telling a story in the voices of the people that we're actually telling them. Sometimes the story has been done many times, but what you're doing is you're offering a new point of view. You're allowing people to tell their own stories, and so it makes it much, much more unique, right? But when you're brainstorming your story, I want you to ask yourself all the time, what is unique about my story? What is unique about my impact, right? Can I articulate that in the proposal? Very often we get really good proposals, but people aren't able to say quite clearly what the impact will be and how the community voices will be heard. And so you almost have to tell the donor why your story is worth funding, right? You want to fund me because this is the only, because very, very few journalists are able to tell the story. Sometimes when people ask for money to go to travel in rural areas, they made the very valid argument that very often journalists in newsrooms that are under-resourced are unable to go out to rural areas in order to tell the stories. This is why my story is important. So tell the donor specifically, this is the first time someone will look at the story in such depth, right? Let the donor know why they should give you a second look. And really, don't send in the obvious idea. If you're asking someone to pay for it, I mean, in one of the, not for the Africa-China group, one of the things, something that came up often is we would ask, why isn't the media house paying for the story, right? If this person is doing a straightforward story, why isn't the media house paying for it? You've got to outline why you're asking for extra funds. So, in the next 50 minutes, I want to talk about the mistakes that I see. And hopefully help you to be able to avoid some of those common mistakes. The shotgun approach, right? The single story. I have one story and I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to ask every donor to fund the story and I'm just going to tweak it here and there. I'm going to change maybe a place, or I'm going to change something, and I'm going to send this off to everyone. And you know, reading through, when you read a lot of proposals, you can actually see which proposals are thoughtful and unique and really have grappled around the criteria for this particular proposal call. And you can see the person who probably kind of did a search for and replace, a search and replace, right? Where the same story is being sent to different donors. Whether you're applying to Africa China reporting project, or whether you're applying to the International Women's Media Fund for storytelling, or whether you're applying to the Investigative Journalism Network's call for funding, have a targeted approach, right? I mean, maybe the theme of your story is similar because it's where your expertise is. Maybe you really want to get funding to do a specific kind of story. That's fine. But when you're talking to every donor, make sure that you are basically tailoring your arguments to their potential panel. So be very, very targeted about what you're asking for. Be very targeted in terms of showing how your story really serves their mandate. Sometimes when NGOs also make a call for story proposals, you need to look at the NGO's mandate and then target your responses to that. Go to the website of the organization, as I said earlier. If this is your first interaction with the the Africa-China reporting project, then go to the website and have a look at the kinds of things, right, that they're doing. So be very, very targeted, and then be thoughtful about your story idea. Be thoughtful about what you're trying to achieve. Think, go back to what I said earlier on. Imagine that this panel that is reviewing your proposal is your worst editor, the one that just is never happy, the one that is forever seeing flaws in your story, the one is for always asking you, well, why should we do the story? You know, that's the person you want to be thinking of as much as possible. Don't make your proposal too short. There were too many short proposals that were just kind of too thin on the ground. Make a persuasive case. Make sure that you've got your context. Make sure that you've outlined the issues that you want to look at. Make sure that you are actually looking at these things in a very, very considered way, and that you're not assuming too much information on the part, too much knowledge and too much information on the part of the person who has to review it. The other thing is that, you know, I want to write a story. As if stories in and of themselves were important. I'm a great believer in the power of storytelling, but I'm also a great believer in the power of storytelling that has a specific outcome, where we're trying to do something. And so it's really, really important for you to begin to look at what is the impact of your story, right? Show the impact of your story, show how your story is taking forward a current conversation, show how you're adding to the current conversation. What you don't want is a situation where your story is being proposed as if the issue hasn't been discussed before. So it's important to illustrate how your investigation integrates with or is a follow-up from prior reporting, either your own reporting or the reporting of other reporters, right? Show how your story adds to the conversation, but also show what the impact of your story will be. And again, it could be anything. It could be highlighting marginalized voices. It could be exposing corruption. It could be highlighting an issue for policymakers to consider, etc., etc. Understand what the value of your story is, and then argue very strongly for that. And then, and this links to the story idea is too thin. You can't, if you're asking for $1,500, you can't sit down on your lap in front of your computer and just start to write thoughts, right? I want to write a story about this. You really do need to do research. And you need to show in your proposal that you've done research, because what that shows the person who's reviewing is that you've done some research, and you therefore know or are convinced that your story is feasible. It makes, if I'm looking at two proposals and the one proposal says I'm going to do this and the other proposal says I've already started looking at these issues and this is what I know is out there and this is what I need to still get, I'm kind of going, well, this person clearly has a story that's feasible, has some sources already in the bag. If we fund this one, it's more likely that it's going to not only be completed, but have impact. So do enough research to show that your story is feasible. Do enough research so that if you and someone else are proposing the same story idea, that your proposal has more detail than the other person's proposal. And you also want to do research so that the language you use shows familiarity with the topic, right? You don't want to do a proposal and quite clearly show that, you know, you went to Wikipedia and cut and paste from Wikipedia. You want to do enough research so that you actually sound fluent in the issues that you're writing about, to the extent that you know who the big people are, you know who the key people are to interview, you have a familiarity with the topic so that you can frame it appropriately within the context. I think that's also, you know, when we think about why we're doing research, you really are kind of doing research so that you're talking with some authority on the issues that you're writing about, and you're not going to be shown up as someone who's kind of just, you know, repeating jargon without really having an understanding of the story you want to write about. The other thing about your proposal is that the fluidity of your writing, right? Your writing style, your writing tone, your ability to put together a good proposal also reflects on your ability to put together a good investigation. And if a donor is looking at a proposal that kind of hasn't been edited, looks incomplete, has huge gaps in the logical process, has gaps of information, doesn't kind of argue very strongly for what you're trying to achieve, you're not going to inspire a lot of confidence with the donor that you are actually able to produce the investigation that you are asking to produce. So really think of that, right? Think of how you're presenting yourself. Think of what your proposal says to the donor about your ability to do complex, in-depth investigations. And then make sure that you are actually presenting something that has been edited, get someone else to review it, get someone else to look at it and see if there are any gaps in the thinking, or if there's any other information that you want to be able to do. So I want to move on before we end up and just open for some discussions. I want you to really think about selling your story. If you didn't realize before that literally every single one of the panelists kind of went through every single one of the proposals, and really I think it took us, I mean, it took me about 2 weeks, right? And the more proposals you read, you know, the more you begin to value the really well-written proposal. The more proposals you read, the more you begin to value the person who is able to sell their story effectively. So I want you to think about how you sell your story, how you make it clear that your story is something that absolutely needs to be published. You need to show why your story is important, what critical information will be unearthed, and what the potential impact is. And you can't do this if you haven't thought about it yourself, right? You need to have a very clear understanding what you're trying to achieve, what the outcome is going to be. When you're selling the story, you know, you can, if you've already spoken to 1 or 2 people, you can identify who you've already spoken to and hint at some of the unique things that have come out. But then you can also say who you still need to speak to and how the support from the funder can get you to speak to those people. And then really, when you're selling your story with your proposal, you need to strike this balance between being thorough and detailed, right? But also being concise and to the point. So I want detail. I want to be able to see. I want a proposal that has no gaps in it, but I also want you to tell me that quickly, right? So really tighten up your work. Make sure that you're getting through that really, really quickly. Before I break up, I stop for a minute and really just kind of open up for any additional questions. I want to go over to the chat and have a look there. I want to say that I want to go back to the Africa-China Reporting Project and say to you that for the Africa-China Reporting Project, a good proposal is one with a relevant topic. If they are asking for specific kinds of stories, make sure that your story idea has been thought through and that it's relevant and that it meets the criteria in terms of the kinds of stories that we're actually looking for, right? It needs to be adequately focused. So don't give me a proposal giving me context for the whole world. Don't give me a proposal that gives me context for the whole of Africa. Give me a proposal that gives me context and gives me an argument that is focused towards telling a specific story. I want to remind you that health is an issue, that the story idea needs to have an angle, it needs to have potential sources, it needs to have a methodology, right? It needs to be a much, much more focused than simply saying, I want to do a story about health. It needs to be clearly and concisely laid out. I want you to think about headings and subheadings in your proposal, right? And even as you're going through, having little subheadings in your proposal really helps the reader to be able to quickly look for what is the format, what is the, and I go back to the sample proposal that we will send you, right? What is the proposed topic? What is the format? Give me a summary of what you're arguing. Give me the significance of the proposed story. Why does the story have to be done? Why now? And why are you the right person to actually tell it? What are the key areas you're going to be looking at? Who are the people that you're thinking of interviewing? What kind of documentation sources are you going to be looking at? What is your proposed budget, and what is your delivery date, and then who's going to be publishing it? Each of those, right? Proposed topic, format, summary, significance of the proposed story, key areas, proposed interviews, proposed budget, delivery date, media house for publication. All of those are little subheadings so that the person who's reviewing the proposal is able to go to it very, very quickly and see what is necessary. So clearly and concisely laid out. At that point, I'm also going to say, make sure that you edit, that you self-edit your work. And if it's possible, go back and have someone else read it and just look for gaps and just look for different ways that you might actually want to make it even better. Make sure that you have sufficient supportive information, right? And that includes it's not compulsory, it's optional, but if you are a freelancer and you're having and you have a publisher who's interested in the story already, you might want to get a publisher's letter of recommendation or publisher's commitment to actually using the story. When we talk about sufficient supportive information, you might also want to think about what stories are you submitting? Are these stories that actually show that you can do the story you are proposing? In your CV, is your CV detailed enough so that I can see your previous jobs that actually show how you have progressed over time in order to do the story that you're doing? And then have a detailed and coherent methodology for your investigation. We didn't speak a lot about the investigation process for this particular presentation, but it's really quite important that when you're proposing an investigation for funding, that you also want to be thinking about how that the investigation process is going to work. And it might also be that you maybe work with your news editor to make sure that the investigation process that you are proposing is coherent, so that when you are actually doing it for the story proposal, that the person who's reading it will go through and say, this is a coherent investigation proposal. Sometimes the proposals don't work because the person who's doing the proposal has as an investigation that you kind of look at and you say, it doesn't work, right? It's not a logical process. This person is asking or is suggesting that they're able to do it in this much time, but from our experience with investigations, we know it's going to take so much time, and therefore they're underestimating either the costs, etc., etc. And so you need to think about those kinds of things, right? Are you able to, as much as possible, have a look at will your process, is your methodology sound, right? Is the methodology that you are proposing actually sound and logical? So I'm going to just check over at the chat very quickly to make sure that we've that there's nothing in the chat group that I want to be able to to look at, and then ask, are there any other questions? Okay. Okay, so Ding is asking, are the story proposals usually for someone to do in their own country, or is it a story proposal idea in South Africa? So absolutely. When people are asking for proposals, they're asking proposals for stories that you want to do in your country. And they're asking for, and that's what makes it so important for you, Ding, to make sure that you are explaining the context for the person who's reviewing the proposal, right? I mean, I have some understanding of issues across the continent, but if you really want to convince me, you might need to explain to me the specific context or the specific issue in your community that you're writing about, or in your country that you're writing about, in order for me to be able to say, yes, that's a story that I want to fund, or that's a story that should be funded. So the proposals really are for stories that you want to write in your area. And sometimes people make proposals and they want to do comparisons in different countries, and that might be funded. And sometimes people make proposals for stories that will be done in their country, and having a look at that as much as possible. So it depends. Also, have a look at the criteria, and make sure that your story actually falls within the criteria. So Tyro Alimi is asking, do panelists look at age or status of a journalist before funding a story? So I will say no, in the sense that when we're looking at the proposals, the first step really is to look at the proposals in terms of how they meet the criteria, right? How they meet the criteria, and whether the person has argued quite strongly that about the story, how the story will actually be done, and what the story will cover. There are a couple of sometimes when we go back and we have a look to see, okay, does the reporter have the capacity to write the story? We might go over and have a quick look and see, look at the CV and look at other stories that they've written. You have a look at the you have a look at the stories that they've submitted as part of it. But no, you would not, the proposal isn't assessed in terms of, is this a senior person, is this a junior person, etc. And I think in our last proposal we had a junior reporter who had a really compelling proposal, said that they were a junior reporter and that these were things we're going to be doing, but the proposal argued really, really strongly in terms of the investigation, and his age wasn't an issue. So no, it's not, that's not one of the things that we would look at when we're doing the assessment of the actual proposal. So it's really, really important. If you think about your proposal needs to speak for itself, because the proposal is the first thing that we look at, or certainly when I'm looking at proposals for Africa Check or for any other organization, I'm looking at, this is the proposal, this is a compelling proposal, and then I look at things like, what is the budget, what is the etc., etc. And so your proposal is a starting point for everything. Any other questions? Let me just make sure that I haven't missed anything earlier. I think for investigative journalists, right? I mean, these calls for proposals are a really, really good opportunity, because very often it's the cost of a longer term investigation that really that we really struggle with. And so again, you know, don't write the proposal the night before. That would be my starting advice. Don't write the proposal the night before the deadline. Take some time to actually properly brainstorm an idea. And if you're doing it for a specific media house, or if you're doing it even for your media house, you know, bounce the idea off that media house. Always have a second person kind of look at your story idea and say, you know, fill in the gaps, make sure that the gaps aren't there. Because make sure that, that all the gaps are filled, etc., etc. So that when you're presenting it, your proposal really, and I can't stress this enough, your proposal stands on its own. You know, you're not there to explain things. You're not there to give additional detail. You're not there really you're not there to correct misconceptions or anything like that. So you need to make sure that when your proposal is being read by a third party, that it doesn't need anything extra in order to support it. So Joyce and Bang was just asking, so when going through the different proposals, do the panelists consider some sort of regional balance? So I think, so Joyce, you know, it goes right back to that whole issue of the proposal really kind of puts you on the map, in the sense of the proposal gives a sense of whether there's something with funding or not. The proposals that stand out, I mean, sometimes if you have many strong from the same region, we might kind of tighten down, etc. But the funder isn't going to say, I want one person from here, and one person from here, and one person from here. It really is about all of the top proposals being looked at. There might be different issues. Maybe there's another call for proposals that's coming up, and people might be able to reapply. But it's the proposal ultimately that speaks to the panelists who are reviewing it and having a look at it. So there is some sort of spread, because I must say that the Africa-China reporting project has a really good spread of people across the continent, and so and from that there's always a very, very good regional spread of applications. But there's not a checklist that kind of says one person from here, one person from there. I need to stress and go back again and say it's your proposal that really kind of speaks as much as possible. So Davis is asking, does the budget affect the proposal, and do you follow up on whether the costs were inflated or realistic? So Davis, the budget affects in the sense that you're kind of looking to see, for me, the budget has an impact because the budget also shows whether the person understands the story that they're trying to tell, whether the person understands the process, right, of storytelling. Because you'll have someone have a great proposal, and then when you go to the budget, you'll say, but this isn't in the budget, that isn't in the budget, this isn't in the budget, etc. And I can't speak for the Africa-China reporting project, but sometimes when I see a story I really like, and I think that the person has under budgeted, I would say I like the story, but I think the person has under budgeted the story, because I'm also aware, right? I mean, and I see this when I sometimes sit on international panels as well, is that very often in Africa, you're too scared to ask for too much money in case you don't get it. And so we tend to under budget ourselves. So I might make a note about it, but I think the budget affects in terms of, for me, it affects in terms of being able to show whether the person understands the reporting process that they're looking at. But obviously, if it's over the budget that the organization can give, that would also be taken into consideration when you're kind of deciding if the proposal meets the criteria or doesn't meet the criteria. If the criteria said the budget is 1,500, then that would actually count against you if you were then asking for $2,200 or something like that. Yeah. And think about it. So when you're thinking of your budget, right? I mean, for me, if the budget is too small, then I think your story thinking is too small. That you should maybe think more and broader about your budget. If your budget is too vague, then I'm also worried that you haven't thought through your methodology. I wouldn't. You don't need to be overly detailed. So. You can say this is the budget for transport, and it includes local transport and this kind of transport, and give a figure for that. But your budget for me links to your methodology. The line items in your budget must link back to your narrative. If there's stuff in your budget that wasn't in your narrative, or if there's stuff in your narrative that's not in your budget, I'm going to be worried about whether or not you actually understand your methodology and your storytelling process. So budgets do have a real role to play. And yeah, I think that the thing that you need to be doing is to be thinking all the time about what is the criteria, what are they asking for, and I don't know if Bangiwe wants to add the second part of that question, Davis, about whether they follow up when the costs are inflated or realistic. I wouldn't be able to answer if they actually go back and take up my recommendation if I say I think that this thing is under budgeted. I like the proposal. I think that that has been under budgeted. With some of other organizations that I've had, but then it's a much longer process and it's lots of one-on-one interviews, and for bigger projects. For those of you who are writing proposals, not just for stories, but also for projects, donors would come back and say to you, we're happy with your proposal, but we need to talk about your budget, and we need you to have a look at various things. And then they will negotiate on the budget for that. So for NGOs, for bigger projects, Davis, they might come back if the costs were inflated or under budgeted. But I think I'd leave that for Bangiwe to maybe answer on that. I'm just trying to see if there are any more questions. So anything I've answered live, and I've done that one, yeah. Okay. Any more questions, guys? So truly, I mean, I would absolutely say to you that think of your proposal as a story, right? So Phil, I see you've raised a question. Okay. Do you want to ask a question? A raised hand. I see that there's a raised hand. I'm told that there's a raised hand. Is it Ozola Phil Oparo Chanillo has raised a hand for a question or a comment? Do you want to answer? Do you want to ask?
It seems like they've been disconnected.
Okay.
So they raised their hand, but now I don't see them any longer on the attendees. So they must have been disconnected.
Okay. Any other questions? Bangiwe, could you answer that particular question on, do you follow up on budgets afterwards?
Yes, we do follow up on the budgets to ensure that the journalists have spent their funds accordingly. And also we don't send off the full amount of the fund to ensure that we have the published article beforehand. So usually we'll give the journalists 90% of the grant amount before they commence with their fieldwork. And once they've published the feature or investigation, and then we go ahead and give them the rest of the funds, the 10% of the remainder. So if they're usually some journalists are honest enough to say that they weren't able to conduct the investigation and they send back the funds. So we really just rely on the honesty and the dependency on the journalists to show to us that they really did conduct the investigation with the funds that they were provided. But we do our best to ensure that the budget items that were listed were spent according to what was stated in the proposals.
And Davis was asking that when they submit proposals, how does the budget affect the proposal, and whether the panelists would follow up on whether the costs were inflated or realistic. So if someone was over budget or so, would you go back to them and say, we want to fund you, but you're over budget?
Well, it's very difficult to be able to tell someone what they've stated, to say, no, you're overstating or understating. But sometimes you can see if the line items have been if they're not very valid, or if they seem like there's some sort of discrepancy with what has been told in the methodology. So we'll always look at the methodology, align it with the budget. So it's very important that when journalists submit their proposals, they are looking through their methodology and all the steps that they said that they're going to be taken, because when it goes to the budget, that's where they relay that information, but in a monetary kind of language. So it does show in its own way, and we try to encourage as much as we can that journalists are very honest and dependable, because whatever that you've overstated, it will show in the outcome and whatever you produce at the end of the day, and that will impact on whether you can be considered when you apply again to the project. So it's very important that journalists really try to make sure that they are credible, so that they don't discourage their future applications to the project. And also, there's nothing wrong if a budget is much less than what the requirement might be. So maybe the grant call would be for 1,500 USD, which is usually the amount of the grants that we give, and probably a journalist feels like their proposal might be just $500 US. That's also compared to their methodology. If they don't need to travel outside of their country, if their story is right in their community, then it's not for us to say you should definitely, it's compulsory for you to use the entire 1,500 USD if their budget doesn't really require all that much. I mean, if everything that they want to report on is within their community that they're in, then that's even better for them to be able to tell the story in a more nuanced and representative manner. So I don't think they should be afraid of whether they've given less in their budget, or I mean, if they've required less in their budget. I think if they just look at their budget, and if it speaks to their methodology, it will be very valid.
Absolutely.
We also have a hand here from Sodik. I'm not sure. Okay. There.
The mic is off.
Hi there, Sodik. Can you unmute yourself so you can ask your question? Okay, it seems like there are not.
So Bongiwe, I'm from Mazalendo from is asking, are links to the stories at Wing Grants published or backlinked in their website? Is there somewhere where people can get previous stories?
Yes, we always do publish the work that has been done by the journalists that we've funded. So they usually send us the original link, which is published in their local or community news public companies or media companies or publications. So when they send us that link, we will always share it on our website, and we obviously say where it was first published, and then that's in that way we ensure that all the stories that have been funded and that have been published through the project are also related to our audience, because usually journalists will be publishing from a media company that is only within the reach of their region. So it also helps when we publish on our website to expand the dialogue onto whatever that was relayed in the feature or the investigation.
Okay. And then Bongiwe, then just if you could help me with Henry as well. What is the time frame for producing the story once you get a grant?
We usually give about 3 months. So we usually communicate to the journalists that they have 3 months from the time which they receive their grant funds. But that's not always written in stone, and we also ask that they communicate to us if there's any interruptions or delays, or it's not always guaranteed that when they've arranged to meet up with their sources that they're going to show up, or the government officials are going to be there. So sometimes journalists will write to us and say to us that they're experiencing some delays because of some particular issues that are related to anything from meeting up with sources to gathering all sorts of information. So it's not something that is written in stone, that that we are not flexible in terms of the time frame, but it's always within 3 months of them receiving their grant funds. And then if there are any issues that they face, they always communicate with us, and we are very flexible in that way, as long as the feature will be published. That's what is most important to us. So it's 3 months, but we're very flexible with that.
Thanks. And Henry, I hope that kind of helps you with your question. Henry's question was that talking about time-bound story proposals and completing the story within the necessary time frame. Some sources take journalists round before interviews due to protocols, bureaucracy, and how would you handle such challenges? So I think what Bongiwe is saying is that it's 3 months usually for you to produce a story, but if you are having problems, you can write back to them and just let them know that you're having specific problems. Another question here, Bongiwe, from Isaac Kisa. He's asking, can you know the next call for story proposals?
Sorry, can you please repeat that? I don't see it.
So when is the next call for story proposals?
Oh, okay. Well, we always have general reporting grants that are open, and that is for any topic that a journalist wants to propose that is outside of a specific theme that we have stipulated for the journalists. So if there's something particularly that the journalist feels like is of interest to them, or is something that needs to be told, then they're always open to send in their proposals. And in terms of themed applications, we currently have a call for online environmental journalism training workshop, and that's also very detailed on our website. So if they can just try to keep up with the calls that we put out on our website, and there they will see all the specific calls that we have out. So at the moment, we have an online environmental journalism training workshop that's open for applications, but we always have general reporting grants applications open for any story that the journalist wants to propose, nothing specific. But in terms of themed grants, we have those, we have that environmental workshop that is open at the moment.
And I would strongly suggest that you follow at Wits China Africa on Twitter, and just keep a look out for specific calls, but also to go to their website and have a look there in terms of what is available for journalists, and when there is a kind of specific theme call that you can respond to. I think we've answered almost all the questions, Bongiwe. In fact, we have. There's nothing in the chat. I want to just wrap up by saying that all of the things that you've learned about good writing, good story writing, can be used to really make your proposal a lot more impactful. And I would urge you, I mean, if I have any advice to give, is at the end of the process, if you could be looking at your proposal and look at your proposal like a reader, in the sense that you would be looking at your proposal like a reader and ask yourself, are there any gaps? If I wasn't intimately involved with this particular story, would I have a very clear idea of what this person is asking for? And finally, to ask yourself, have I made a compelling argument that my story, more than anyone else's story, can actually should actually be used? So I think that's really important. I think I'm going to hand over now to Bangabi to close off. It's been really, really good to spend time with you guys today, and thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for your questions. For those of you who put questions in the in your sign on, I do believe, Sadiq, I see your note asking if we can share links of opportunities in the Africa-China reporting. I believe that you will get a follow-up email from this webinar with the presentations, etc. And I'll ask Bangiwe to make sure that in the follow-up email we also put the link where you can go in order to see some of those opportunities. Don't be discouraged if you didn't get funding this time round, and please continue to try. There are and also not just to this opportunity, but to other opportunities. There are many people who are willing to fund really good storytelling, and you just need to absolutely make sure that you're convincing the donor that your story is essential and will have impact and should be funded. So thank you very much, everyone. Keep safe, wear your mask, keep physical distancing, and be well. So thank you very much, everyone. I don't know if you want to say goodbye, Bongiwe, but I think to say thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you, Paula. This has been very beneficial, I'm very sure, to the journalists. From the response that we got as soon as we got the registrations out, journalists have been very, eager to ask these questions, and we're so happy that we have been able to assist them in their reporting proposal writing. And also I really like what you say, that they should never be discouraged. That's also what we would like to emphasize, that they must never be discouraged in terms of not getting the outcome that they would like. Many journalists keep applying, and you never know when you actually going to get that acceptance to your proposal. So it's always a good time to try again. And so I just want to thank you very much. I want to thank also our attendees for taking their time out to get this training and to upskill themselves, and also to our network of journalists who are coming from all over the world, who are always looking out for each and every engagement that we put out and every opportunity that we put out. And to the Africa-China reporting team and the Viz Journalism Department team, thank you so much for your kind support and assistance in enabling these opportunities for our journalists. So yeah, I hope everyone stays safe and healthy and well and fit under the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. And have a great week further, and keep well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye, Bangi. Bye, everyone.